Hello everyone, this is Pico Entertainment and we are back again. And we're going to continue now with our series of reviewing the classic anime from the 80s and 90s. And for me now, one of the best examples, I think, in Venus Wars. And this was released in 1989 and it was based on a really kind of short serialized manga by Yoshikazu Yasuki. And it ran from 1987 to 1989. And it really focuses on the concept, which is a bit of a stretch, of we have the Venus planet that is hit by a comet in the early 2000s, and as a result it melts all the ice caps, and this has an effect on the atmosphere which essentially reconfigures the surface, making it inhabitable, right, so people can live on it, right? So over the years we see people start to colonize the planet, and we have to the point in 2083 where people are now fully living on a planet, existing within it, and we have two rival colonies. We have Ishtar and Aphrodite, and over the years these two nations have been embroiled in a really kind of epic kind of rival war between one another, and the story unfolds and we see how this war affects characters and the toll it takes on these characters and the struggles, and if you like the pockets of resistance within both camps. So essentially the Ishtar colony are the ones who have the superior forces, they have the superior numbers and the weaponry, and they begin to start to occupy the Aphrodinian population. And we focus on a young group of characters called the Killer Commandos, and we see these characters really become under the stress and the burden of this occupation. They start to question their identity, their purpose, the meaning of their own lives, you know, where their lives are heading, what's going to happen in the future, what's going to happen to their families. And that's kind of really relevant as to what's going on today without really going in too deep to it. But yeah, it's just when you have these set group of characters and they have this really kind of, you know, pending sense of doom, and it's really changing their lives forever, and what they're going to do, how are they going to cope with the struggle, how are they going to resist it. And over the course of the story they really kind of build a sense of worth and determination, and they want to strike back and fight against the Ishtarian forces that are overtaking their lives, if you like. We see certain characters whose families make certain decisions, you know, some people want to resist the Ishtarian forces, some people want to work with them, and some people, if you like, want to just separate themselves and come away from them. And each of these decisions, we see the consequences and the ramifications of what happens in it. And Venus Wars is just a fantastic example of anime at its finest. And what I mean by that is it's one which combines the story and the characters with the action and the spectacle, right? And when you fuse those elements together, you really get a great result. The animation in this is superb. I highly recommend that you get a remastered or HD version of this. If you go online or do a bit of searching, you know, I don't know if you can get a version of this on YouTube, but if you do a bit of searching, you'll be able to find a remastered version of this, and I highly recommend you watch that, because the visual and the epic scope of the sequences here is fantastic, as we see the Ishtarian forces with their ships and their tanks, and they're coming into the Aphrodinian community, and their missiles and, you know, bullets everywhere, and you know, we see this wide spanning shots of really these tanks crushing into the community and these ships just swooping in from the sky, and it's really got this sense of doom laden Armageddon feel to it. And the music is fantastic. It's really cinematic, and you really feel the sense of the dread and the peril of the people coming under this occupation, right? It's all fantastic, it's all great to watch on here. So the group of characters that we focus on, like I said, are the Killer Commandos. We have Hero, who's kind of the young, typical angry, reckless youth. He doesn't really know what to do with himself. He's really kind of, you know, sort of really angry at the sense that his people and his life is being taken over by the Ishtarians, and he wants to break the rules as such. And as we get over the course of the story, he finds a more defined purpose, and he joins the resistance and becomes a lot more prominent in the fight against Ishtar. We have Sue, who is kind of like this typical kind of very chatty, very, you know, pretty blonde kind of reporter. She wants to get the exclusive and get the latest scoop, and you know, she's one of those typical reporters who's quite happy to put herself in danger. We see early scenes when the occupation begins, and you've got these bullets and lasers spraying all over the place. And typical reporter, she puts herself right in the firing line. She wants to get the best shot and it gets the best picture. And yeah, she can maybe get a bit annoying. She's a likable at first, but maybe she's a bit annoying because she's very loud and chatty and shouty. And she has a relationship with one of the commanders called Will, who seems like this very passive kind of joker within the group, but as the story propels, he becomes a lot more involved in the resistance and wanting to strike back. We have Miranda, who's very tall for a redhead, and she's very strong, and again very reckless and wanting to again strike back against the Ishtarian forces, and she's willing to do anything. And they build on this or they hint at maybe there's a romantic relationship between her and Hero, or she's attracted to Hero, but they never really follow on through from that. I'm not sure if they develop that storyline more in the manga, but here there's little hints of it. She's always standing up for Hero, fighting his cause as such. So yeah, she's a very headstrong character. We also have Commander Donna, who is like the main general of the Ishtarian forces, and he's a very typical kind of dictator and strong. We see beginning scenes where he's kind of talking to the Aphrodinian politicians, and he's saying, we're going to overrun you, and we're completely going to take over, and he wants to get involved, and he's ruthless, and he take no prisoners as such. And yeah, he wants to completely override the war and make sure that the Ishtaran forces do whatever they can to win. We also have Lieutenant Kurtz, who's later on we see, without spoiling too much, is part of the resistance group that the commanders come into later on. And yeah, he's very much someone who, he wants to make sure that whoever is recruited into their resistance has got what it takes, and he winds people up just to try and get a reaction, kind of just gauge who's got the taste for the fight and who hasn't. And we see constant tensions between him and Hero throughout on there. So that's kind of feel like the main group of characters. Like I said, Venus Wars is great at the showing us these characters and the different stresses and struggles they go throughout. It's a bit slow to begin with if you're someone who's used to an anime and you look all the action and spectacle right from the get-go. Venus Wars isn't that. Venus Wars moves at a bit of a slow pace, like I said, as we see the characters coming to terms with this occupation. So it takes a while to get into it, but stick through it, because these are really the important scenes, right? The kind of slow burn where, like I said, we get to know these people and their different reactions towards the situation they're in. But once the story moves along and we get more into meeting the resistance and taking on the Ishtarian forces, it's all great. It's all, really fantastic to watch. The animation sequences, there's a real depth and detail to the drawings. Really, I'd say more of the vehicles and the tanks and the bikes and the kind of rocky landscapes that we see involved on here. It's just great visually, to watch on it. And as we ramp up, the climax is spectacular throughout. And like I said, the score itself, it's really kind of immerses you into the story on here. So this is one I would highly recommend. There's not really too negative points I could put across this anime. Maybe you could argue that the group of characters become less and less involved as the story moves on, and it really primarily focuses more on Hero, and some of the characters kind of get left behind, which I think was unfortunate. You could argue that the soundtrack is a bit dated. When we have the kind of war sequences, they're great, that's really cinematic, but you kind of, in between, sometimes you get more of the typical 80s kind of pop, maybe a slightly cheesy kind of soundtrack, but you were going to get that, this comes from the 80s, right? So you're always going to get that. I don't think that's really much of a complaint to really focus on. I think if you're more attuned to new school anime, you might find this is a bit dated or aged, but like I said, that's not the point of this series. The point of it is we're concentrating on anime that is best on focus on the story and the characters and the subject matter, right? And Venus Wars is a great example of this. It's about an hour and 39 minutes, hour and 40 minutes. So yeah, it's not too long, and it's not overly heavy-handed. It's not an over exposition, if you look. It's just really, like I said, focusing more on the direct story of the characters and everything that they go through, and I just think it's just really great to watch. I would highly recommend this. So if I was to give Venus Wars a rating, I would give it an 8.9 out of 10. I just think it's vivid, it's really kind of epic in scope, and more importantly, the story, and that's always the key. If you can get a connection to the story and where the characters are going and where they're heading, then you're going to be onto a win. And I really recommend that you watch Venus Wars. Again, if you can, try and find a really remastered HD version. You'll find a lot of these animes now. I know some of them appear on certain streaming apps, but if you hunt around for a bit, you'll find a lot of these animes. They're getting now remastered. Into a much more cleaner, kind of HD kind of version, and that's what they should be viewed on, and especially with Venus Wars. That's one of the best examples on here. So highly recommend this, and yeah, so it's one of those really kind of epic, story-driven animes that I think you will enjoy a lot. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Did you really like this, or did you think it's a bit slow and you really want a much more action orientated from the beginning of what you demand from your old school anime, or did you think this is one of those great examples of where the stories and characters matter a lot more rather than just the heavy aesthetics and visuals that I think we get with normal new school anime or more recent anime, if you want to put it like that. So let me know what you think in the comments below. I'll continue to give you more reviews of this classic anime series as I go along. Keep yourselves at short distances, wash your hands constantly, and I'll provide more coverage. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you very, very soon.